Hello and welcome to the Paul Green Comedy PaulCast. It is September 18th, 2024. This is episode 275. I am back on track for daily, everybody. Stand-up comedian, improviser, actor, and dreamer. Paul Green here. So, what did I mean by I'm back on track here for going daily? So, if you follow the podcast, you know that back in November of last year, I made a commitment that I was going to post an episode of this podcast every day for 365 days. And I was doing so freaking good, everybody. I was crushing it for like 240 days or something like that. And then a bunch of life happened. And I got a little thrown off my daily goal, and it was starting to turn into like every other day, every other day. And I needed to double down. I needed to recommit and just go, nope, got to do it daily. That was the goal. So I am back to daily. So for all of you out there who have a dream in your life, are pursuing it, or just a goal, or you just maybe want to expand upon whatever it is that is going on in your life. That's what I like to mainly talk about, and I do so in the context of my own life as I'm pursuing my own dreams and my own ambitions as a stand-up comedian and as a performer. And oh, what a journey it has been. And tonight, I had one of the most unique stand-up comedy experiences of my life. And that experience was I got to perform at Arizona Goat Yoga. Yes, you heard me correctly. Arizona Goat Yoga. So what exactly is goat yoga? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's doing yoga in the midst of goats. And 2 alpacas, by the way. So, what the heck does that mean? Well, I was asking myself that same question. So, to tell the story here about how I ended up trying to do comedy at a event that is very clearly odd already and unique. What had happened is about 6 months ago, I met a woman whose name is Sarah. And Sarah is just a really kind of interesting entrepreneurial type woman. And I met her at an open mic because she had started doing some stand-up comedy. And she and I became friends. And I actually had her as a guest on this podcast. So if you look back, about 3 or 4 months ago, you'll see an episode where I interviewed her. And during that interview, she started talking about this business venture that she started called Goat Yoga. And it was so random, I couldn't even wrap my head around it. But ultimately, she had a friend who owns like a goat farm. And they just had this idea of like, it would be fun if people were doing yoga outside while the goats just sort of ran around. And so they gave it a try, and it blew up. I don't know why, but people loved it. And they've been doing that for 9 years now, I think is what she said. And they've had tons of television exposure. They're like a national tourist attraction. They've been on multiple reality TV shows. Most recently, they've been on a Jersey Shore reunion. They've been on America's Got Talent. So it's this whole thing that I didn't even know existed 6 months ago. And so about a month ago, Sarah reaches out and says, hey, why don't you come out to Goat Yoga and do some comedy? which made no sense to me whatsoever. But I figured, okay. So, so she starts advertising goat yoga and stand-up comedy show. Oh, life is so weird sometimes. So I show up to this, it was like an equestrian center down in, like southeast, it's near Queen Creek or Gilbert, if you know anything about Arizona, geography, which, anybody listening from Arizona does. If you're from outside of the state, you know what I'm talking about. Just like picture the Phoenix metropolis. It's like southeast out a ways. And, so there was this equestrian center that had just a big sort of grazing pasture, is the best I could describe it. And they bring all of these goats and a couple alpacas, and then a bunch of people just show up with yoga mats. And then Sarah just runs a yoga class while goats are like hopping on people's backs and like walking underneath them. And then they'll get a bunch of people to like be on all fours side by side. And then the goats will like run like across their backs like it's a track. It's actually really adorable. And that's all happening while people are doing yoga poses. And so Sarah's bright idea was, well, why don't you just show up? You riff a lot. Why don't you just show up, and while all this is going on, just kind of riff and do comedy? So I was like, all right. And I brought my piano. So I set up my keyboard. I set up a microphone. All these people are showing up to do goat yoga. And I just start sort of riffing jokes, kind of, just kind of making fun of Sarah and what everybody's doing, playfully and riffing or whatever. And I was sort of just playing background music while people were doing yoga, and all of these goats were running around. It was so random. I didn't necessarily have a bad time, but it was definitely not like the most enjoyable comedic environment. That's not really the ideal comedy environment. People weren't like super paying attention. I think a lot of people, they're just sort of like, what the heck is going on to begin with? Because it's such a unique experience anyway to be doing yoga with just goats running around. So the people weren't really focused, and add on top of that, some random comedian they've never heard of riffing and throwing jokes. I mean, it went fine, but it was still a little weird. So I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. But you want to know what, everybody? You only live once. We're all going to be dead someday. And sometimes in life, you just want to do something weird. You just, opportunities will come and go. And there ain't nothing wrong with taking an opportunity that somebody gives you, even if it isn't what you would expect or what maybe you thought you would want to do, and you just go and do it and figure out what happens. You know what I mean? At least that's what I'm trying to tell myself to justify the fact that I just did stand-up comedy outside in front of a bunch of goats and 2 alpacas named Kip and Napoleon. So I did that, and I am actually looking forward to the next couple of days because I have a handful of comedy shows, all of which I'm looking forward to. Tomorrow night, I'm going to be back at my hometown club, the one and only JP's Comedy Club, doing an improv show, which will be interesting. It's with a handful of comedians who I know, who I've done stand-up with, but I've never done improv with, so it'll be really interesting to see how we gel improvisationally. So I've got that going on, and then the next 2 nights, I'll be back at JP's to do regular stand-up, which I haven't done, like, a regular stand-up show in a club for a while. I've been traveling, during the Midlife Crisis comedy show. I went to LA and I played piano for the Magic Duo. I did do one stand-up set like at a bar, which was a decent show, but it's been a little bit since I've just had a steady line of just my sort of standard stand-up comedy shows. And I'm really looking forward to that because after I do those 4 shows, I have a show at a festival in Las Vegas on Monday night. I'm really looking forward to going back and doing this festival. It's been a little while since I've done it. I think it's been 2 years. It's the World Series of Comedy. And yeah, I don't think I've done it since 2021 probably. Yeah, I definitely didn't do it in 2022 or 2023. So I submitted, and fortunately, they had me back even after my long hiatus. So I will be looking forward to really honing in the material that I want to do in Las Vegas on Monday. I think that's the 23rd or maybe the 22nd. So, everybody, life is just moving along. Still figuring out the midlife crisis comedy show with my comedy partner, Josh Novi. We have been looking to build that comedy brand. Well, I'm still looking to build my own comedy brand and just loving life, trying to figure this all out and take it day by day and do whatever I can to pursue the dream, take whatever steps I can, and saying yes to opportunities, even if they don't make sense, even if they seem random, like doing comedy for Arizona Goat Yoga. So with that, I have been reading a really great book that I've been enjoying a lot. When I say reading, I mean listening to on Audible, called The Magic of Thinking Big. And this book has really been a good contrast to the book that I was reading previously and commenting on the podcast, The 48 Laws of Power. And it's really interesting. I've noticed a shift in my mood. Isn't that weird? That I was reading this book, The 48 Laws of Power, which really felt heavy to me. It felt very cynical. It felt very dark. It felt very evil. And I was still reading the book just because I wanted to finish it and I wanted to give it its credence because it's a very popular book. And I realized that it really was shifting my attitude just towards life and my emotions a little bit. I was a little bit more bitter, a little bit more cynical. And of course, because I was reading a bitter, cynical book. So now that I finished that book and now I'm reading a book that's very positive, very open-minded, very expansive. It's all about, going for your dreams and thinking big. And yeah, I'm just enjoying it, and my mood's better. And I wonder if part of me getting off track on doing my daily podcast actually had something to do with the fact that I was commenting on this book that was really negative. And so maybe that actually also contributed to my getting thrown off my goals. Isn't that interesting? So, The Magic of Thinking Big, really good book. I recommend it. Read it, listen to it, whatever. And today's chapter is Manage Your Environment. And environment, it discusses it in a lot more broad sense. It's not just necessarily what's physically around you, but also has to do with the company that you keep, the type of thoughts that you entertain, the people you hang out with, who you go to work with, who you associate with, right? So there's a lot wrapped up into this. And that's what I love about this book is I just agree with everything. I think everything that this book is talking about is so appropriate and so significant for anybody out there accomplishing a dream. I feel a lot of the principles that this book is espousing are actually crucial. Like, I don't actually know how you can be successful if you don't exercise to some degree these different elements that the book is espousing. And manage your environment is so huge. And interestingly enough, I just observed that one thing in my environment was this book I was reading that I really didn't like. And the book was, again, very negative, very cynical. The 48 Laws of Power. It's a very, in my opinion, shallow book in terms of its intention, in terms of the principles and laws that it's espousing, in terms of the intent behind exercising those laws, and I think it affected me because it was a book I was listening to, but it was noise in my environment. When I was listening to the book, it was in my environment, right? I was, it's like when your next door neighbor has a loud dog, right? Like you're listening to it. It's in your environment. And this book was in my environment, and it affected me, I think, negatively. Now that book is out of my environment. Now a very positive book. I've replaced it with a positive book, and it's really changed my outlook and my energy and my positivity and how I'm approaching life and my thinking and my ambition and my faith and my belief in myself. And that's just a real life example of how important it is to surround yourself with the people, the energy, the sounds, the songs, the smells, the visual, whatever it is. Surround yourself as much as possible with elements of positivity or of elements of that will help put you in the right energy to go out and accomplish your dreams, whatever that may look like. If you have a bitter, negative friend who every time you try to tell him good news, or every time you try to tell him you're doing something or you're going for something, and their immediate response is for them to start projecting all of their bitterness and all of their failures on you, and all of the, well, this is why that won't work. And this reminds me of, and by the way, I could probably think of hundreds of examples of this playing out, but I remember one of my college professors was a super, super cool guy, and we got along. He was super smart, and he was a businessman as well. So he was a college professor, but it was almost like his professorship was just like one of his jobs. He also owned a jewelry store, and that's the only businesses that I knew of. And I was on sort of this student council activities group at college that he was a part of, and so was one of the other professors. And I remember this one day, I was hearing this professor friend of mine talk to this other professor about this idea he had. And what his idea was is that he wanted to start, in essence, a boys' ranch for troubled teens. And what he wanted to do was incorporate horseback riding and horse training with recovery, like helping these troubled teens, get off drugs or get out of gangs or get out of trouble or whatever. And his plan was, well, I'm going to bring them out to a ranch. We're going to isolate them from their negative environments. We're going to put them in charge of a horse. And he had some really strong beliefs about the connection between human and animal, and that when, these teens are connecting with their horses, that, and it's going to create a bond, it's going to create a relationship, and then these teens are responsible for learning how to shoe the horses and clean the horses and comb them and ride them and train them and all this stuff. So, that was his idea. And I remember him telling this idea to this other professor. And this other professor just started pointing out all of the reasons this was going to be so hard. Oh, well, if you do that, you're going to have to get all kinds of insurance and all kinds of liability. Oh, one of those horses, kicks a teenager, man, that's going to be a lawsuit. They'll bury you. And oh my gosh, how much money does it cost to pay for a ranch? I mean, the land alone, and then, you're going to have to try to find parents with deep pockets, to do, and just started pointing out all of the difficulties and stuff. And I remember listening to this and going, how does this negative professor, you've never done anything like this. You don't even know what the heck you're talking about. But to me, it was such a very clear indication of how easy it is for people who have never really tried to go for something to be so negative and cynical towards people who are going for their dreams. And I've experienced this too. I've experienced this with like close friends of mine when I started doing comedy and when I really started trying to, live my dreams, and like when I was starting to think about moving to LA, and I would tell people about that, and everybody had an opinion on it. And a lot of times it was very negative. It was like, oh, you're moving to LA. Well, it's very expensive. It's hard to live there. Oh, well, everybody wants to go to LA and make it big, and almost nobody does. And, you should watch this documentary called That Guy That's on That One Show, which is this documentary about all of these LA actors who, have gotten small roles, but they never really got a big role, and what a struggle it is, and how little money actors actually make if you aren't the mega superstar. And it's really fascinating. And contrast that with one of my favorite comedians, Bill Burr. And I like listening to Bill Burr's podcast. I mean, it's not nearly as good as the Paul Green Comedy PaulCast, but he does okay. But he only does it twice a week. I do it daily, except recently where I've been every other day. But anyway, I was listening to the Bill Burr podcast once, and his fans will like write emails into the show, and then he'll read the emails on his podcast and then just sort of give his response. And people write in about all kinds of stuff. And matter of fact, I have written into the Bill Burr podcast, and he has read 2 different emails of mine on his podcast. Hey, no big deal. But anyway, so this guy writes Bill Burr an email and says, hey, I'm dating this woman right now, and I don't know if I should keep dating her because it doesn't seem like she believes in my dreams, and my dream is to get into professional wrestling and then to build a professional wrestling career into an acting career, pretty much like what The Rock did, right? It's like he pretty much wants to be Dwayne The Rock Johnson. And he's telling his girlfriend, and what does his girlfriend say? Oh, that's not going to happen. That's so hard. Most people don't make it, blah, 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 right? And then Bill Burr says in this email, or in response to this email, he goes, oh, she's not the one for you, man. You've got to go for your dreams. People do it all the time. People move to Hollywood and they make it. If you want to be a wrestler, go do it. Like, he's so positive and encouraging to this random listener who just sent him an email. And I just thought, oh, isn't that interesting? Because here's Bill Burr, who actually did make it and started doing stand-up and then slummed it around for years and years and years and years, until he finally started to get a following and started to get, TV roles and TV credits. And now, of course, he's Bill Burr. Now he can sell out Royal Albert Hall in London and, produce movies and, get leading roles in Judd Apatow films and the whole thing. And so, of course, when somebody comes to him and says, hey, I have this dream, he goes, oh, you need to go for it. You need to go for it, right? And that, to me, it's just such a stark contrast from, Bill Burr saying, go live your dreams, to my professor friend telling his dreams to another coworker, and the coworker pretty much saying, oh, Joe, don't do that, don't do that. And by the way, I happen to know that professor did move forward. He did start his ranch, and he eventually quit teaching, and he was running that ranch full time. I don't know how successful it was. I sort of lost touch with him, but I knew that he went and did it. So that, when I think about managing your environment, one of the most important elements of your environment you need to manage is the voices in your environment. Who are you listening to? Who are you talking to? Who are your close friends that you're talking to? Who are your family members that you're talking to? Who are your acquaintances? Who are your coworkers? Who are you partnering up with? I think I've heard it once now that we are the accumulation of the 5 people we spend the most time with, or something like that. So if you are constantly spending time with somebody who every time you talk to them, they're pointing out all the pitfalls, they're pointing out everything that can go wrong. If you're single and looking for a relationship, and the other people you hang out with and talk to all the time are single and bitter, and all they do is complain about dating and complain about, all women are just gold diggers, or all women are blah, 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 blah. Or if, on the female side, all men are a bunch of, cheating pigs, dogs, blah, 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 blah. It's probably going to make it really difficult if a relationship is what you're seeking, to find a good, healthy relationship if the people you're talking to the most are very negative and critical about relationships. Or if you're wanting to start a business and everybody you talk to has only failed at business or has never been successful, or, thinks that everybody who is wealthy or successful are just a bunch of, con artists or greedy, or greedy scammers, or, if you want to work your way up in your job and all of your coworkers, are lazy, bitter, entitled coworkers who, just complain about management and complain about the company and hate being at work all day, probably going to be really difficult for you to advance if those are the people who you're constantly listening to. So, manage that environment. Very, very crucial. And I am very fortunate right now that I am surrounded by incredibly ambitious people who believe in themselves, who believe in me. My comedy partner, Josh Novi, is so great. We have big ambitions. The people who have chosen to work with us, our manager, Lily, we just started working with another advertiser, a guy named Michael, who's fantastic, and they're all working so hard to help us build this brand. My friend Jim Perry, who owns JP's Comedy Club. We want to talk about a dreamer. Guy wants to do stand-up comedy, so he starts a comedy club. And you would not believe the backlash that he got from that. I mean, he's told me some stories that just blow my mind. And what did he want to do? He wanted to do stand-up comedy. And so he starts a comedy club. And the way he was treated, you would have thought that he was, trying to start a new world order. And anyway, so I'm surrounded by these very ambitious, positive people. My family is so supportive of me and, believe in me. And so I'm very fortunate. I'm just very fortunate to have positive, uplifting, people who support my, career, support my ambitions, and want to help me be successful and want to see me be successful, and are not negative and critical. Matter of fact, I've been kind of catching myself being the negative, critical one. So it's like, I'm the one, I got to check myself. But anyway, manage that environment, everybody. Surround yourself with positive people. Surround yourself with positive books, positive voices, positive art, ambitious art, all of that. And see if that doesn't make a difference as you seek to pursue and accomplish your dreams and goals. All right, everybody, that is all for today. Thank you so much for listening to the Paul Green Comedy PaulCast. It is technically it's now September 19th. I started this at about 11:40. I'll probably release this as my September 18th episode, though, and then release September 19th episode, so that it's still technically daily. Or maybe I won't do that. Okay. Anyway, I love you all so much. I hope your dreams are coming true. You're out there crushing it, having good experiences, having random opportunities come to you, like doing stand-up comedy in front of goats and people doing yoga. Keep at it, everybody. I believe in you. I believe in going for your dreams. And if you're out there going for it, you're on the journey, then I applaud you. And I see you. I hear you. All right, everybody. This is the Paul Green Comedy PaulCast, September 19th, episode 275. I love you all so much, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.